The third section of the form, I like to use one word again to remember how best to understand it, and that is coordination. Right? Or flow would be another word. And what that means is that what we're doing in the third section of the form is we're putting together ideas that we've already seen in the first and second section and making one hand do several motions to teach us the idea that Wing Chun is not a one hand at a time style, that one hand can be used for many things. But being a difficult thing to do two things at once, again, the designers of the form very cleverly created it in such a way that we don't have to worry about one limb at a time, and so therefore we're not going to be confusing ourselves. When we actually apply it, there might be multiple limb actions happening, but first thing we're doing is getting one side of the brain to concentrate on one series of actions. So the third section of the form begins with the same Park Sao action we've already seen, but it changes into a horizontal palm. And that's in direct opposite to what we did in the first section, where it was from the inside and vertical. And the reason it's different is because it looks at the other side of that situation. If you're starting outside your opponent's hands, in other words, you're the who was the bad guy last time, you're now the good guy but on the outside, if you were to use a vertical shape, you would lose. You've already established that something vertical inside will beat anything on the outside. So the only way you're going to beat the technique that's in the middle is to create a greater center elbow position. In other words, you're applying Fuksal concept. When you're on the inside, it was derived from the Tan Sao. Now we're using Fuksal. So by turning the hand over, it pushes the elbow inwards, and that covers the center line. So that hopefully will make immediate sense to you all. When I was inside, if he was shooting in my head, I use vertical to win, which consequently means if I'm outside and he uses vertical and I use vertical, he wins. So to beat his vertical attack, use horizontal. Now the shape of my arm effectively defeats the Tan Sao, so Fuksal beats Tan Sao. So anytime you're outside, one of the things you can use is this palm strike. You can also still use a punch. Punch needs to be backed up unless you're particularly strong in the center line. You always back it up with another hand action of some kind. Right? Or you might swap over and just control it on the outside, hitting on the inside. But if it's going to be a palm strike, it has to be a horizontal one to guarantee that this arm can't get through. Right, so that's why it starts from outside. It's assuming my hands are out, he's coming down the middle. So to get that control, I've got to drop my elbow in. If I did the same shot with a vertical one, I wouldn't get there. He'd probably get through. Right, simple enough. Right, so it's just in case you missed it the first time, the form is kind of saying, hey stupid, remember this? This is the other half. You circle and come back, so we're still training the wrist and the forearm. We then, on both sides obviously the same technique, we then do another interpretation of the Tan Sao. This is the one that we're going to use in combat, although again, there's a subtle difference between the form and application. Because in the form, we're still using the center line as a reference point. Because we haven't gone anywhere yet, we're still facing a stationary target. So what I'm doing is hitting the center. What I'm really trying to do is learn to get control over my hands so that my hands go exactly where I want them to do, where I want them to go. Just like before I said about the samurai, he doesn't want his sword to go clunk on the floor because the next sound you hear will be his head right behind the sword. He wants his sword to stop in the middle so he can defend again. With Tan Sao, it's the same. I don't want my Tan Sao to go over there. If you're a kid years and years ago trying to learn football, you probably had a number of occasions where you went, oh, all right, or if you started golf and you swung and the ball's still there. You all know the experience. It's no different when you're trying to fight someone. Sometimes your hands don't do what you want them to do, or your legs can be the same. So what we're doing here is first and foremost, we're learning how to find the target. The end position should match exactly the same position you had when you did it in slow motion. We're simply getting there with some energy, which is the second part of the trick involved here. We're now learning to make the Tan Sao be effective in combat by putting some power into it, driven from the hips and the elbows. And thirdly, what we're also trying to do is make sure that when we do this, we're practicing for when the hands are not necessarily up and ready, but in fact I might have my hands down. So symbolically I represent that by dropping the hand before I rotate it and bring it forwards. And that's where we have a little example that my teacher came up with years ago. He used to say, imagine a mountain here and a valley and another mountain over here, and there's a village on both mountains and they hate each other. And this village decides they're going to blow up that village, so they get their cannon, they point it straight at the other village and fire the cannonball, and of course it goes down into the valley. It's all simple physics. These guys are smart, so they aim their cannon up a little bit, so when they fire their cannonball, lands on the opposite village, end of problem. village destroyed. Right? Tansao is the same. My hands are down and I just shoot it out. I might end up either below or too high to the target. But if I bring it up and then over and slightly downwards, like that cannonball, I'll reach the perfect point to control it. Now, what is the perfect point? Against a round attack, what you've got to remember is that while the punch starts at one place, it can hit a big range of possible targets. It can be anywhere in that curve. You might be aiming to come in here, or through here, or even a low technique. If in an extreme way, you might be doing an upper body shot. But we'll exclude that for the moment, just consider attacks to the head and upper body. I don't know exactly what line that might come in on, because I'm not in Michael's head. I'm not reading his thoughts. The one thing I can be very sure of is that punch is starting at his, well, not starting at his shoulder, because technically it starts at his spine, but it's at least movement-wise deriving its movement at the shoulder. Now his shoulder is not moving. This can move through that whole range. Shoulder's not going anywhere. So what level do I want to aim my tansao? Somewhere near the shoulder area. So I don't know whether the line is middle, medium or high, but when he throws it, I go out here, near the shoulder. Because that way, no matter where his fist was going, I'm closing the door near the hinges. If I try and stop it there and Michael pushes against me, he can get a lot of leverage. But if I hold him with the hinges, push now, it's harder. He can still move me, but it takes a bit of effort for him to move me. So if we went to that door now, I'll do it. Never done this before to show anyone. Talked about it. The reason the door is easy to open is because there's a metal handle attached to the door. They're both solid, so it gives me lots of leverage. It's a long way away from the hinges. But if I try to move the door this way, it actually takes a lot of effort, especially with that shoulder. It's hard work to move the door closer to the hinges because it doesn't have the leverage factor. So his attack is the same. You have a lot of Wing Chun people have this theory of facing the attack, facing the point of contact. I can't see the point for two reasons. Number one, if the point of contact is obviously going to be his fist, and I face the point of contact, I'm meeting the fist at the very worst time to meet it, when it's just about to hit me. Secondly, this being like the door, this is where Michael has the most leverage because it's the furthest point from his shoulder. So therefore, at least theoretically, the most power is at the end of the punch. So if he's swinging the punch and I try and stop it there, I'm trying to beat the strongest punch he's got. Whereas if I meet the punch when it's starting, it's not the strongest punch he's got. It's much, much weaker because I'm near those hinges. And not only that, but what it does effectively is it takes what is naturally a round movement and more or less makes it become straight. So now it's straight line versus straight line instead of straight line versus round line. And round line will win. So even though the form has got me doing it in the middle, when I actually use it, I go out here. But it is kind of still the middle because notice where my chest is now facing? Halfway through his attack. So the middle is still pretty much where it was when I did it in the form. I've just changed my angle. My countermeasure is still straight down the line. But my defensive tool is a slightly different angle. So this, without trying to sound ridiculous or confusing, there are two center lines happening. One is my original center, which is always going to be there, shortest distance between me and the target, and the other one is the center that's always changing as my body changes. And I'm applying both at the same time. Thanks, Mark. Makes sense? Everyone got that? Makes sense to you? Right, so when I do that first action, it assumes my hands may well be down, and I've got to get over that attack to control it. Then quite separately, and this is the important thing, these are separate ideas. They're not the same sequence of movements that have to be applied as a sequence. Once I've done that action, I then do a completely different idea, which is I practice jams up. Now those of you in the room, and it's probably most of you, if not every single one of you, have done single hand chi sao, you know the first move if you're the defensive side is to sink your elbow into jams up. That's why it's here. It's because when you first learnt Wing Chun in olden times, you didn't go through it like you guys do in a modern classroom where everything's explained and shown to you in detail ahead of the time. You were standing there for 6 to 12 months just doing this. And then someone would come up to you and say, okay, give me your hands, I'm going to show you something. And they'd start moving you through chi sao by example. And because you practiced that for a number of months, they say, you know that action you got in the form? Well, that's what you're doing now. And you start to click things together. Well, we don't teach like that anymore because it's not a very constructive way for people to learn. So you've already got the tool and you've done the drill. now you can say, okay, yeah, now I understand the purpose for that. I've got a contact situation happening, he's too strong, so I sink. Just enough to get control. I'm dropping the elbow to get the power from the stance to put my opponent offline. And that's just the basis, again, of a number of other possibilities. It can become a jut, it can become a tan. Tan style can come backwards if it has to. It's probably best used in a forward direction, but it could be a backward action. But it's obviously going to be used when you've got the outside position. You can't jump style on the inside. It won't work. All right, so what I mean by that, Roger, can you help me? If I'm on the outside with my right hand against his left and he wants to hit through the centre, jump style helps control that. But if I'm on the inside, jump style would help him hit me. So I can't do it in there. If I'm on the inside, I have to use either a tan or jut, or even if he's pushing hard enough, bomb, to get rid of it. But anytime I'm on the outside and he tries to thrust through, sinking the elbow can create enough of an avenue for me to start hitting again. It's not something that you would normally do out of contact, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work out of contact, because in the Chum Kill form we have an out of contact jam style. I'm not quite prepared and suddenly he launches at me. So I drop my elbow in a forward action to make sure the first one doesn't get in, and then I react hopefully with the next technique. So Chum Kill begins with that interpretation of jam style. So in effect there's three. There's the I'm in the wrong position, I need to get out of here, jam style. There's that I'm in the right position but this guy's too strong, jam style. And there's I'm not in a very good position and he's attacking me, jam style. Right? But that's a bit hard to interpret into Chinese, so we just call it jam style. Right? Sinking elbow or sinking arm. Now again, a completely disconnected technique, we do tan again. We do it a second time. We go jam, tan again. Why twice? Because you also have situations where your hands are already out there and you need to do that tan style. When Roger hit me before, my hands were down, I had to get it up there. If my hands are already up there, there might only be a very short distance between my defence and his attack. I've still got to get power. I can't just leave my hand there and knock it out of the way. So when we practice or do the second one, we're learning how to get the same kind of energy over a small distance. Now this is where our Wing Chun differs a lot from the others, because at the end of there we circle, and I'll talk about this in a moment, so I want to connect two other ideas first. Do a low palm strike and come back, and when we've done that on both sides we then come out and do jump tan style again, which we follow with gan style. Now most Wing Chun around the world only has the tan, gan, tan style section. You will find very few have the jump style. And the story goes, in the brief version, my teacher got into a fight with someone. The guy was very, very strong, wouldn't go down, he was hurt, but he wouldn't drop. And at one point, in a blind panic, he basically fell down, covered his head because he didn't want to get hit anymore, and lunged out with a punch. My teacher instinctively did what he knew at the time, which was to use jam style, and the punch still got through. Hit him at the top of the leg, tore muscles across the top of the leg, did a fair bit of damage. He knocked the guy out, finished the fight, but the fact remained he'd been hit and he wasn't too happy about it. So when he discussed that with his teacher, Yip Man said, well, you know, maybe if you had done gan style. And I was like, well, I don't know gan style because that's in the dummy form and it's in the ability form, but at the time my Sifu was training, he hadn't reached that part of his training yet. He was fighting a long time before he learned the whole system. Now, for a little guy fighting other big guys, or people his own size, jam style is enough. But when you're a tall person fighting little guys, or a little guy facing a guy who dropped to his knees, all the angles change. And so the jump didn't go low enough to cover his flanks. So gan style is what we use for that situation. We cut down lower to shield ourselves almost from the knee upwards. And so at that point, all the people who were watching and listening started doing their form with gan style and stopped practicing the jump. My teacher was a very clever man, as most of you probably appreciate him by the fact that what I'm giving you came from him, it's not my invention. And what he did was he decided on the spot, well, they're both important, I'm going to continue practicing both. Most of the other people dropped the jump style in preference for the gan style. So there's a distinct line of difference between those who practiced pre-1955, 56 and those who came afterwards. All those from the really earliest days who started teaching at an earlier time, you'll see them probably only doing the jam style part. And then they go straight to bomb. And all those from about 55, 56 onwards only do gan style, and they do no jam. And only the Wong-Sen lineage, and I haven't come across many others who do, have both. It's quite unique to us to keep both. Because Wing Chun is a system where you can afford to leave things out, but some things shouldn't be left out. Because some things are there for a very important reason, and that technique is no surprise. Legend has it that because the teacher that Yip Man had was a big guy, Chan Mo Sin was apparently a very large man, he used to use Ganso a lot, because tall people against shorter people, that's a useful technique. But Yip Man's supposed to have also learned from a second teacher, who was a little guy called Nam Bik, who was the son of the teacher of his teacher. So we're getting into family connections now. And being a little man, he didn't need Ganso. He was always fighting tall people, so he just used Jam. So Yip Man had modified his own instruction to incorporate the smaller man's technique, because he was not a big man either. He's only about 5'6", 5'7". He's not a huge man. And at that time, he was able to draw back on his previous training and say, oh, okay, we'll put that in there. Hence, that's why we have both. Now, to go backwards slightly, after that second Tansal, the Hyunsal, the wrist circling, is there for the obvious reason again, we're going from one side to the other side. But the Che Jiang, or the sloping downward palm strike, is quite deliberate in the way that it moves, because it presents the best possible technique following the wrist circle. And what I mean by that, if I use Daniel as a good example because of being a big person, if for whatever reason I've ended up on the wrong side of Daniel's arm, which is a very bad place to be, and I use that Hyunsal to get to the outside, it would make no sense whatsoever to then try to hit up here again, because by then he can turn back and his greater leverage would just knock me out of the centre again. So the simple thing is, if my hand has got me to here, go for the closest target, which represents either his belly or his groin. So that's why when you do that wrist circle, you keep your elbow very, very still and move the wrist only, and then you hit low. Because what I want to do probably is just reach down here so that he backs off exactly like he just did, and that puts his head back into my line of sight, whereas initially he might be too tall to reach his head. Now, again, if you're coming on the other way, you can use it this way, but it's dangerous because it exposes you to that hand. But it's not an impossibility. In Chi-Sao, for example, you can be rolling with someone, just fake it, and I can circle here and attack him there at the same time as I'm controlling. It's a possibility. It's not a great technique, but it's a way of learning how to use the shapes. So in that case, you could go from outside to inside, but normally we go from inside to outside and then stay on that line. Once I've been down there, then I can afford to take it out, but I don't want to go all the way to there to get out of trouble and then go back into trouble again. Right, so that's why, thanks Dan.
But what's stops them from coming across it?
Because I've turned you.
Right.
You're not facing me anymore, so it's going to be very hard for that one to get in. So when you're doing that action, make sure you keep your elbow very, very still and work the wrist as hard as you can. Again, exaggerate, don't just flick it. Big circle, and then from there, using the little bit of bend that's in the elbow, drive it slightly down. So it sits about rib, kidney level. It's not a shot to the hips. All right, we're working just below where the arm would be for the sake of practice. Obviously, you can modify it according to the target, but in practice, everything is being done in the most perfect way, so you've got the best chance of getting near perfect results under pressure. Something I neglected to say earlier on. We are doing all these techniques on a line or a level or in such a way as to train them in the most perfect possible way, so that under pressure we get a near perfect result. If you're slack in the way you train it, you're going to have Buckley's chance of getting it to work properly under real pressure. If you don't care what level your hand's on, for example, it's not going to get there. You've got to be striving to hit that perfect point so that it's got a chance to get near that perfect point. Another very important thing that wasn't mentioned earlier on, with the Tansa, a lot of people point it to the side first and then try to turn it back. You've already lost if it's going that way. Your hand should always be facing the direction of the movement. Right? Same here, when I'm doing this, forwards, when I'm going here, facing the target all the time. So I'm directing my energy. If I don't direct the energy, it will not get there because the pressure will push it offline. But the moment you turn it properly, with a Tansa, another thing is a lot of people keep it stiff and flat. You should actually be trying to bend your wrist slightly forward so that you're driving in that direction, not going up. You don't want the Tansa to lift because it'll fall back. You want it to drive. On the wooden dummy, do the same thing, and the dummy can't move, it's made out of wood. So you go through the best possible impression of the idea. Notice how my arm is going up slightly because this is in the way, but I'm still flattening the hand out because I want to direct my energy that way. I don't want to go up there. So on the training apparatus, I have to modify it because I need to create an energy without being able to create the right shape. So I'm manipulating what I'm doing. In the form, I don't have to manipulate so obviously because I can get the shape I want. But it's still, you can see it's slightly flatter here. It's not like that. Right? These are only subtle things, but sometimes subtlety is everything. In Wing Chun, the difference between 1 centimetre is your nose on your face sometimes. Whereas in another style where the movements travel X amount of distance, 1 centimetre doesn't mean anything. Now, having done the palm strike action, we then come back. You notice I've brought it up to the shoulder. Like I said earlier on, I don't want to practice my elbow strikes from down there because it's going to make me pull up, which is not a good action. So when I circle, I raise the arm up at the same time until I get back to level, and then pull straight back. It's quite important that you get that happening so you get a pure elbow action and not a circular one. You don't want an action that goes around like that. Now, in that second application, Gansal is very, very badly done because a lot of people just cut down from the hand. It actually has got to start in the elbow. Like everything, it's originating back here. And what's happening is I'm quite literally pulling my elbow back towards my hip. I'm trying to draw power from the stance. But in pulling the elbow back, my hand is actually going forwards and downwards. I don't want the hand to come back. I want the hand to go forward. Because if I'm protecting the low line against, for argument's sake, uppercuts or low punches of a straight nature, they're in fact no different to round punches at head height apart from the level. So like I go out to meet a round punch with a tan or a foot application, to meet a low attack, I still need to go out to meet it. I don't want to catch it when it's back here. I want to try and cut it off as early as I can. But the more important application for Gansal is not the blocking of kicks and punches, even if that's what we can use it for, is to get you out of a bad situation when your arms are trapped up very, very badly. What may have already happened to you a few times in your training, can happen quite often in Chisal, is you find yourself inside and your opponent's got you in this kind of position. He's trying to drive your head back through the wall and your elbow's up here. Now if I try to push down on Enzo's arm with my hand, coming from my shoulder, it's having no effect at all. Because he is effectively here using Tansal. This is Tansal theory being applied, and Tansal is very strong. If he wants to, he can just about support my body weight on that kick, right? Because it's one of nature's strongest angles. This is why it's used in building all the time. Bookshelves and all sorts of things use that kind of shape. You can't do that with hooks up, but you can definitely do that with a tongue. So if that's up there and I'm trying to push down on it, there's no way I'm going to change that. But if my elbow, which is now closer to my hip than my hand is, draws to my hip, it has the effect of changing the structure. So no matter how badly I'm caught up, if I use the elbow, I've got a chance to get that down. It's a very common place to find yourself in. I've got hands all trapped up like that, and his hand's there. If he pushes down from the shoulder, no effect. But if he uses his elbow, I've got to go with it. If I don't, I'm going to get some serious damage done in here. So this is what the Gansal is most important in practice for getting out of a bad place. And it's especially good for when you're in the wrong position here like this. This is a bad place to be. So you want to change it and get back. That's why we do it so many times in the wooden dummy form. It's a recovery position. Here we're just learning the basic building blocks, the ABCs of what a Gansal does, which is it pulls from the elbow and slices down. And in that way, against low punches, it can be on the outside, it can be on the inside. Against uppercuts, same thing. You can work it in there as well. And against kicks of a straight nature in particular, you can get to the outside or the inside. Inside's not as good because you've got to fight the other hand, but the best place to be is on the outside, just to guide it away as an alternative means of controlling the kick. Right? So it's a very, very versatile tool, but if you don't do it properly in the form, it won't perform its most important action, which is to get you out of a bad place by getting power from the stance. Thanks, Andrew. Having done the Gansal action, and I'll just point out a couple of things about it to make it more precise for you, it should finish in front of your leg, not in the centre. Unlike a lot of the other techniques, it doesn't seek the centre. It needs to go to the width of your body. If not, if you're blocking kicks or punches to here, they can still get through. You need to clear your body completely so that anything that goes past you literally goes past you. It doesn't continue in your line. The best shape is to have the shape of the forearm and the hand matching the angle of the lower leg and not turn it over this way, or even worse, this way. You see a lot of people do it like that, especially if they play wooden dummy and they always do Gansal like that. Now the reason they do that is because this side's got flesh on it and it doesn't hurt. Whereas this side is mostly bone and it hurts. Well, tough. Get with the program. It's got to hurt a little bit. You can't do it properly. Right? That's just the nature of the beast. You've got to train that. If you start cheating on it and turning it this way, you're actually doing a technique that collapses very, very easily. Even straight up and down can be pushed aside very easily. And flat can be pushed aside. But that angle is very, very strong. You can test it yourself. Just get a person, Michael, if you can. Just get a training partner to push on your arm. Just stick your arm down there and I'll put it sideways. Right? And Michael try to push it throughout the way. And he can move that. If I put it straight up and down, he can move it. If I do it this way, he only moves me in a straight line. Or if it's a punch, he's actually trying to push past with a fist. Right? He's trying to go that way, flat up and down, it gets in. Straight up and down, it gets in. If I put that angle, can't get in. Just the subtle change of the shape makes the whole thing more effective. Inside or outside, do the same on this side. If I do it flat, you can get through. If I do it straight, it comes through. If I change it just to that angle, now I can't get through. All I did was make my hand turn that much. So sometimes small is important. My size does matter, but in reverse. Alright, thanks, Michael. So when you're playing the technique in the form, that's where you've got to get it precise because you don't have time to check it out later on when you're in the middle of a fight. It's got to be right now. Let your wrist bend slightly so there's a bit of play in the wrist. So it's straight up and down. And don't lock your elbow out completely. Don't hyperextend the joint because that means if you do collide hard with a kick or a punch, the shock wave goes into your elbow, you may shatter your elbow. If it's slightly bent, it's got a bit of play left. So it will absorb the impact. It's like springs in a car. It's a slightly softer ride, so it's less damaging to the passengers. So you want to protect your elbow joint. When you've done that, the golden law of fighting is if your hands are down for any reason, for goodness sake, get them back up again as soon as you can. So that's emphasised by doing another tansal. It re-emphasises the fact that if the hands are down, you need to be able to get them into the centre and make the target. And then same circle, same palm strike, same elbow. Finally, on left and right, we've done that. We then come to the bong sal action. Now, traditionally, again, like I said before, you would do the form for anywhere up to 12 months before you learn anything else. And then one of the things they would do in traditional times is they say, okay, we're going to start doing dan chi sal, single hand chi sal. And you need a bong sal to do chi sal. So the form introduces it at least at the most basic level, so you've got an understanding of what the basic shape is. Second form takes it to pieces and tries it in many different ways, but the first form gets the basic one right. So what we're doing is simply rolling it forward and turning it over. Not going around, not lifting up. Quite literally, bring your arm forward till you run out of body to touch. When you can't feel anything anymore, turn it over. Make sure it's coming out in a straight line so that your elbow is directly in front of your shoulder. Your lumpy bone in the wrist over here is roughly in line with the inside of the other shoulder. You don't want it in the center, that's a big mistake, too far forward. You definitely don't want it back in line with the elbow, too close. It needs to be that your elbow is always closer to you than your wrist is. And turn it all the way over. If it's like this, palm down, the bones are running side by side, like my fingers. Being flat, things can get over the top. But that extra little quarter of a turn makes the bones in your arm sit one on top of the other, just again like my fingers that way. So it creates a ridge which sends energy out there. So again, if you like your nose, you won't do it this way, you'll do it that way because it'll save your nose, if not other parts of you. Having done the bong, what we want to do is also prepare for chi sal with a very important idea that once you've got contact, you don't let your hands come back. Because if you do, you're going to get hit. That's what we're training for ourselves all the way through the form. So in order to understand that, we leave everything where it is and bring the elbow directly back to the centre. Now if you do it properly, you'll end up in exactly the same tansal shape again. Because as it's just been revealed to you, bong sal and tansal are the same technique. Or we should say the same idea, but being applied on two different levels. When tansal fails at this level, it mutates into bong sal. But it's still pretty much the same shape. It's just two different elevations of the same idea. One low, one high. Elbow up, elbow down. But everything else about it, pretty much the same. At the end of the bong, you tai jiao, which means you use your inverted palm and push forward, not up, and definitely not a hit. You don't try to hit anybody like that. Unless you have extreme flexibility in your wrist, that's going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt them. That's fine, that's not. I wouldn't even half do it because I know what it's going to do to my wrist. Right? What this is for is not for hitting, it's for controlling. It's showing you the basic idea that if you can control someone's forearms and elbows with your palm, You manipulate them to where you want them to go. In Chiu Sao, as a simple example, when you're rolling with someone, you find the guy's just got too strong a forward defence, you just can't get in down the middle. Well, an alternative is to shift his elbows and get in from the outside. Right? Against an opponent who's he might be trying to push me back into the wall, lifting his elbows slightly helps get that off. Right? If it's on the outside of his arm, you don't try to get underneath again, you just go across. It's the same idea, modified. On the wooden dummy, a lot of people do it incorrectly because they do this. It should be, so the dummy shakes. Because I'm actually sending my strength into the dummy, not just pushing the arms out the way. So one of the examples you can use in Chiu Sao again, you want to make room for a kick, you don't want to be stepping back yourself, because if I step back, he'll feel the gap and try and come after me. As soon as he feels me going backwards, he's going to hit me. So if I'm determined I want to land a kick in Chiu Sao, I need to move Roger into range. So I do so by lifting his elbows. And that puts him inside kicking range. So there's another place that you can use it. It won't work if I try and lift his hands up. Nothing happens. I've got to drive them forwards. So he gets shifted away, and then they've got space. Right? And there's all sorts of other things. If you're in security work, you would have already been obviously shown, or should have been, that you don't try and drag a person out by the arm. Because they don't want to go, they're not going to go. But if you say, come on mate, you need to come with me, and take his elbow, he's basically got to go. Because you've got to go where your elbow goes. Whereas if I hold him down here, he can resist. He can attack me, or he can pull the other way. Said, come on mate, he doesn't want to go anywhere. But come on mate, it's got to go. So it gives you an element of control. So in that very simple action, you're being shown quite an important idea that this is where you control your opponent. Anywhere in that area, controls his stance, controls his arms, give you access to the target. And at the very end of the form, we've got these actions. Finishing up with the actual first punch that we actually do in the form as a real punch. But before we get to the punch, why is all this here? This first one, we call this action Siu Sao. Again, in Hong Kong, Cantonese, they don't call it that because that's a Fat San word. They tend to call it, what's the word they use? Chet Sao or something similar, which means to undress, which gives a whole different idea, undressing hands. I'm just trying to work out how you would undress by doing this. But they tend to call it that or some other weird and wonderful thing. But the implication behind Siu Sao is Siu means scrape or shave. And it's telling you how you do the action, which is to stay close to your own arm and apply a bit of pressure. Because what you're learning to do is build up a little bit of power from close range. But more importantly, there's three very crucial things happening there. The very first action, in placing the left hand into the centre, is a means of getting ready for an emergency whereby you need to defend the lower gate, but your hands aren't ready. They're not out in front of you. Or more importantly, you've got the wrong hand forward. In the perfect world, if Michael was about to, let's say, launch an uppercut with his left hand, in the perfect world I'd have my right hand out there and it's ready to defend. Trouble is, I might have my left hand out there and he does the same thing. Well, I can't say, could you just step back and do that again, mate, because I wasn't quite ready. He's not likely to be very, very cooperative. And I don't have time to be going, oh, and change hands, because by the time it takes him to throw the punch, he's already there before I've gotten halfway to changing. So what I need is a way to get my hand down there quickly, so I just shoot down as I counter-strike. Same against a kick, it might happen the same thing against a kick. I don't have the hand forward that would be the ideal one, so I've got to get something down there in a hurry. So hence, we just shoot for the centre to cover, just like this, if you like, it's an extension of that idea on a lower level. Just put something in the way to give yourself a chance. Thanks, Michael. More important than that, and in order of importance in a reverse way, so we call that the least important thing, even though it's relatively crucial to know. The second thing is that you're learning that if one shape won't work, changing shapes will work. Simple explanation, you want to go forward, but there's a force coming back at you can't beat. Right, so Benzo's got his hand there in front of me. He's got a punch coming through here. I've got my Tansel trying to get in there. He's too strong. I'm not getting anywhere. He's going to push me out the way. So what do? I change it. I make it bong up. Or I can't get through. He's too strong, so I change it. I make it jut up. Or like you saw before, he's got me jammed up from there. I can't get through that way, so I change it, and now I can get in. In other words, the reverse of any shape will give you a way out. If he's holding me on this side, then I go to the outside and I can get out of it. If he's holding me this way, mirror side, tan side won't do it, but long side will. So without panicking, as soon as you feel the drag, you just move away from the hand that's grabbing you and you can get out of it. Anything going forward can also go backwards. So if I want to get in there, so he's trying to push in, I want to get in there and he's too strong, I can go backwards to get rid of that energy. Or I can go forwards to get rid of that energy. Doesn't matter which way I go, it's important is that I'm changing the shape. As soon as one shape won't work, I create a shape that will work. Makes sense? But most important of all, what this is showing you is that you never ever take away a hand without replacing it. And in the second form and the third form, it gets done on the normal level, because in those forms we don't have to consider the emergency dancer. There's a chance that that was never always there. I'm somehow suspecting that that was put in at a later date. It probably just went straight into this one. And then somewhere along the line they added this one because someone found a situation that required that thinking. Because the forms aren't set in stone, they can be played around with. Bilgi form is a perfect example. It's definitely not a finished form. It could be added on to if something came up that was worthwhile. But the point being, if I take away my hand, so if I take away that hand and don't replace it, I've left a void that can be filled. So if I want to remove this hand, I must make sure something else covers it and takes its place. So if Roger and I are exchanging blows and we come to a collision, and I decide, well, I'm not getting any with that one, so I'll hit him with this one, I don't do that, because I leave myself wide open. So instead, I replace it with this hand, or I replace it with this hand, or I replace it with this hand. So I'm constantly replacing. And the punch is a perfect example of that theory, because if I throw this punch and it doesn't get in, I don't just take it away. I replace it. And if he throws one at the same time, then replace it. So it's covering myself, so he can't get in until something gets through on one side or the other. You don't punch what Siu used to call attacking the shoulder. We don't do these sort of punches because it's really not attacking the centre, it's attacking the shoulder so he can get in. I always attack the centre, so if he wants to get in, he's got to get past the centre. If he tries anything there, as long as I'm attacking the centre, it's very hard for him to get on top again. So when we're doing this action, although we're doing it down here, thanks Roger, what I'm saying to myself is wherever my hands are, if there's a contact point, don't just take this away. Put something back in its place. It can be an attack, it can be a defense, but put something back in its place. And at the very end, when I've done this action, I throw out my first punch and I continue to punch at exactly the same target. And that's the crucial thing, hitting the same spot, not hitting here, there and everywhere. Same target, because that's harder to stop and it's more likely to get through, because that continual attack is going to wear your opponent's defences down. Whereas if you keep changing, you might think, oh, I'm really clever now, I'll trick him. It's not really tricking him at all, it's providing more opportunities for him to counter. Same target all the time, he's constantly under fire. If you're running away from me, trying to hide from me, and I'm taking shots all around the room, you know that I can't always hit you. But if every time you move I shoot straight at you, you're going to worry, oop, I better not move, better stay behind cover. Same thing, that's what we're doing in this one. So you force him to stay behind cover, you make him defend, and then he's easy to hit. You don't let him hit back. And every punch is done in such a way that the attacking hand has the straightest line and the front hand gets out of its way. And in doing so, as the hand is coming back, it's keeping anything else that's chasing it from going down the centre and pushes it to the side. So if your opponent tries to push your arm out of the way, you let him do it and hit him with the next one. If he tries to lift your arm up by doing an upper block, you just immediately and instinctively pull that down and hit him with the next one. You don't try and punch over the top of the other defence. So when we get to the end of the form, we should by now have set right down in the stance. We've got a balance steady, our centre of gravity low, so the punches should be coming up from the floor and feel like they've got the whole body behind them and not shoulder punches. They're generated from elbows, hips, stance. So if you're doing it properly, you'll feel as though there's an impact in your legs. You'll feel strength coming through the ground. If you don't feel that, then you're not sitting down in the stance properly.